There is no official record of when the giant was last seen or who last saw him, but a few specks from both kingdoms insist that they saw the giant ascending into the heavens early one morning a few years after he ran away from the kingdom of Rod. About the time that the giant ran off, spies from the kingdom of Rylanate came to the kingdom of Rod, and saw that the specks of Rod were not obliterated. They noticed that their enemies were not even bruised a little. This report went back to King Rylanate, who was shocked and upset that once again the specks of Rod had foiled his own speck kingdom. He ordered a delegation to go to the kingdom of Rod and meet with a delegation of the specks of Rod. When the delegation of Rylanate arrived at Rod, there was much shock and agitation. "You are supposed to be squashed," said the representative of Rylanate. "Well, you are supposed to be squished," said the representative of Rod. Tensions rose and accusations flew. Each side blamed the other for making their king's most famous speech a pack of lies. The delegations gave messages to each other to take back to their respective kings about how there could never be peace between the two kingdoms. As they left the meeting, they all thumbed their noses at each other. The Ogdilla was back in full swing. King Rylanate grew tired of the thousands of years of bickering between his specks and King Rod's specks. In a desperate move to bring about a day of peace, he asked for a secret meeting with King Rod at the center of Ogdilla. In the 34th month, on the second day, during the 89th year of the third millennium of the Ogdilla, the kings met. The two kings reasoned for 2 weeks, trying solutions that were fair for both kingdoms, but to no avail. Meanwhile, Ogdilla himself had grown so tired of the angst he felt on his back that he spread all of the specks of Rod to one half of his back, and the specks of Rylanate to the other half of his back. In a violent quake, Ogdilla split into 2 beings, which floated independently from each other. The only problem was that King Rod ended up on the half of the back with the specks of Rylanate, and King Rylanate found himself on the half of Ogdilla with the specks of Rod. King Rylanate was at first mistaken by the specks of Rod as King Rod, but he quickly corrected the specks of Rod, announcing that he was King Rylanate. The specks of Rod immediately cut him into tiny pieces and fed him to their young. King Rod, however, told the specks of Rylanate that he was indeed their king, and since few specks of Rylanate had ever seen their own king, they believed him. Eventually, King Rod had the specks of Rylanate build him a large castle, which housed his children, who are half speck of Rod and half speck of Rylanate. King Rod, posing as King Rylanate, lived to see his specks harmoniously blend where it was previously thought impossible. The specks of Rylanate did not cultivate food on Ogdilla's back using their own spit like the specks of Rod. Instead, they rubbed their heads on the fine, hairy, grass-like particles that had attached themselves to cover the Rylanate portion of Ogdilla's back. The rubbing caused static charges to build and build, until small arcs of lightning flashed off of the specks' heads. Ogdilla's blue gas in the immediate area of the arcs of lightning reacted by turning into bite-sized cubes of lime-flavored finger snacks. This was the sole source of food for the specks of Rylanate,